Well, welcome back to Undone Life Together. This is our final conversation in our 5 week extended conversation, which has been in to simplify. It's just been an online study of the book Undone and the themes around that. But these 5 lab conversations, we've dove into what I like to call the more complicated topics, the ones we can't deal with on a single Facebook post, and so. It's been really fun. It's been challenging and intense at times. We've talked about control. We've talked about what happens when prayer doesn't work. We've talked about so many different things. Hey there, Cindy. Glad you're with us. And today, I was trying to figure out what we're going to talk about today since it's our last conversation. But before I get to that, don't you love it when I leave you hanging?
My favorite thing. It's a good thing I'm not a control freak.
Before I get to that, I wanted to ask you, Sherry, and those of you who are listening, what's been the most meaningful part of this 5 week conversation for you?
The thing,
I say meaningful instead of favorite, because honestly, this whole conversation has been uncomfortable in many ways. So it wasn't exactly like a trip to Mexico or, going to the movies. It's been a little bit more intense. So what has been the most meaningful part of this for you?
I'll tell you the biggest takeaway happened last week during the question that you posted about during a difficult time, which of the following things do you need to hear from people you care about? And, you gave a good long list. And what stunned me is how different everybody's responses were. I thought I knew what the few handful of right answers were, but some of the things that would make my skin crawl, other people actually want to hear.
Exactly. I asked the same thing.
And people, there was a lot of responses to it. And so my thought was, oh my goodness, how important that I know what I need and want and be able to articulate it. And then that I be able to have conversations with others about what they need and want. Because otherwise we're just giving each other what we want. Mm-hmm. And then feeling hurt when the other person isn't responding. And so it really elevated my belief in my need to take more responsibility. And I thought, well, how can I take responsibility for what I need in crisis? I'm the only one who can. Nobody else can do it for me. So that was huge.
It kind of takes some of the pressure off us. Well, it should take some of the pressure off of what we put on other people for knowing and meeting our needs. Because what seems so automatic to us isn't automatic to everybody else, or what they would need is actually what they're offering, and it's completely different than what you need. So, ultimately we're all very well intentioned, and yes, we have a lot to learn about how to walk with somebody in the middle of a crisis, but the responsibility really starts with us as far as doing our own homework and doing our own behind the scenes work to know what it is we need and then to verbalize it. And even when we verbalize it, not everybody's going to get it right. So having grace over all of it, but understanding ultimately that responsibility starts with us. Nobody can read our minds. And I actually thought that was very profound as well.
How about you? What's been the most impactful thing for you?
Where to begin? I think when I started this idea came to me actually in December. So it was a fairly recent idea, and our team put it together very quickly, which I was very thankful for. But my anticipation was that if we could get, 100 or 200 people together that were brave enough to be authentic and deal with the undone life, I'd be very, very pleased. Mm-hmm. And I think what has blown me away or reminded me of why I do what I do is the fact that we had almost 1,000 people participate in this. And this has not been an easy journey. So this is 1,000 people that were desperate enough, hungry enough to overcome the pain of walking through an honest conversation like this for 5 weeks in order to grow and to learn. How many other hundreds and hundreds of people just weren't ready for it yet? So I think that part was meaningful for me because it reminded me how we desperately need to know we're not alone. And somebody, you and I, we have to be willing to go first and to be honest and step out of our own comfort zone. So that way we can connect with other people who need to know that they're not alone. So it kind of renewed my determination or my commitment to do what I feel like I'm called to do. And that's been a very profound thing for me. Very surprising, I think. And the other piece that has been meaningful to me, which may sound a little bizarre, is the depth of pain that is out there. the stories that we have heard every day online on the Facebook group through these conversations, but also the stories that I have received over private emails and private messages every single day has blown me away. My story is not exactly easy. It's been pretty hard and painful. And yet some of the stories that have come in, and we're talking dozens and dozens and dozens of them, I have no words for the amount of pain that people are enduring. And then I remind myself, and these are the people that are in a Western culture or first world culture where they have access to computers and the ability to even verbalize it. How many people in the world would never be able to express their pain in such a format? And so, I guess that part sounds depressing on one hand, but I also think it's there's a comfort in the greater community of suffering, and that we realize it's not just about us, that there's so much more going on, and that perhaps we can figure out a way to do this together and not make the suffering the chief character in the story, but God's purposes and God's greater community of people a bigger part of the story. Yeah. All right, that was a little bit of a diversion, but those are just some thoughts as we're reflecting back on the last 5 weeks of this conversation. So today I wanted to come up with a way to wrap up these 5 weeks in a way that is somewhat meaningful and doesn't feel like we're just dropping everyone cold turkey. This has been, a hard conversation in many ways, and we've gone very, very deep. And I have great respect for how many people have been so transparent and vulnerable and have done the hard work to walk through this. But how can we leave on somewhat of a positive note and yet still be very honest about real life at the same time? And so today, the title of today's episode of Blab is just called The Unexpected Gifts of an Undone Life. Because at some point we have to turn these horror stories that we're living, where we just can't see beyond the pain. Somewhere along the way, we have to turn the corner from just sitting in the mess to actually seeing the gifts in the mess. And this is a hard turn, right? That we can easily get very comfortable in the drama and forget to see the possibility and the purpose and the gifts. And this isn't to be Pollyanna and try to slap a bow on bad things, but this is to be literally looking for the gifts in the middle of the undone, because they're there. So again, the title of today's episode is just The Unexpected Gifts of the Undone Life. And I'm basically going to give you 3 different gifts that I have found. They're very broad, but obviously there will be many specific applications of the gifts in the undone life. And my purpose in talking about this today is that ultimately how we come through our undone places is a matter of choice. And that's very hard to hear, because sometimes it's much more comfortable to allow ourselves to be a victim of our circumstances than a chief character that can make a choice about how the outcome turns out. But I wanted to ask you, Sherry, I'm sure you can think of different people in your life that have had, unthinkable circumstances.
Yeah.
And I've had many. And there's one kind of person that I see who has unthinkable circumstances, and as a result, they become the barest fraction of themselves. I see bitterness. I see isolation. I see an inability to function. I see kind of a constant state of victimization, and I hurt for them because they have every reason to be sad and grieving what they experience. So it's not surprising that they would be in that place. But yet I've also seen the different kind of person who has endured unbelievably horrific circumstances as well. And yet every time I see them, they're full of joy. That doesn't mean they're without pain. They still have joy. They're always giving themselves away. They are full of love. Their words are, for the most part, positive and hopeful and full of faith. And so I look at these 2 different types of people, and I can think of people right off the top of my head. Can you, Sherry?
Oh, absolutely.
And I sit there and go, okay, so it's really not necessarily the circumstances that determine the kind of people we become. It's really the kind of people we are in our circumstances, what we choose to be and how we choose to see it at the moment. And that's a hard thing to deal with, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think some people don't, I think some people have more choices than others because of their life experience, the way they were raised, their natural temperament. And so for me personally, the last 5 years, I've just been learning how to even find the gamut of choices rather than just the one choice of reacting the way I've always reacted and getting stuck into a cycle. And so I think that's been one of the greatest of values of this study is, and the transparency you've had in the book is for me reading it, I had so many notes to myself. Oh, this is possible. This is something you can do. Because when you haven't had it role modeled or shown or demonstrated, or maybe I did and I just didn't see it or consider it valuable, discovering that there are choices and then learning to practice those individual choices is huge. Otherwise, like you said, we get stuck in victimization, and then other people turn against us because they assume, well, if you want to be miserable, go ahead and be miserable. Mm-hmm. If it's the only thing you know how to do, it's kind of hard to get out on your own.
Exactly. And I want to be very transparent. I have a child who is the eternally optimistic, positive person. I mean, he was just born with that natural personality where everything has a silver lining. I love that about him. I am not that. You and I have talked about this before, Sherry, where I tend to be that highly sensitive person where everything hits me very, very deeply, and wounds can linger for a very long time, and emotionally processing things seem to take just tons of effort. I look at my husband and especially this one child of ours, and I'm like, gosh, I wish I was more like you guys, where things just don't get him down. That's not me. So I'm coming at this from a place of I desperately need to learn this and work on this every single day. So if you're that person that feels like I'm being trite, trust me, I'm not. I totally understand how hard this is. I'm just not willing to lay down and let cancer ruin my life. I'm not willing to lay down and let my losses and wounds get the final word. I just don't want to do that. And so I may be fighting this battle for finding the gifts until the day I die. I might. There's a good chance, because I don't know that I'm ever going to wake up and just be that eternally optimistic person. But to me, it's worth the daily battle to look for the gifts in the unexpected life. So that way, hopefully, God can help me reframe my losses and turn them into gains. And that's what I hope to talk about today. So anyway, the first gift that I wanted to talk about that I have gained from this very unexpected undone life is a refined perspective. And that's a big, broad term. But in short, my refined perspective has taught me what matters. Now, we know what we think matters, right? We think, for much of my life, we think what matters is our performance, right? How good we do at our jobs or at mothering or marriage and all of that. My security, my sense of safety as far as financial or in relationship, whatever, my happiness, my rights, my longevity. We think that those are the things that matter. So we work very hard to worry and anxiety ourselves in order to make sure that those things that matter are all taken care of. But when all control is taken out of your hands through an undone life, when things kind of unravel, you start to realize that some of the things that you thought mattered didn't really matter. For example, while I was laying on the couch, sicker than a dog, all of those years of worrying about retirement and saving for college and all of that, couldn't care less.
Yeah.
Just didn't matter. All the things that I worried about with my kids, like what time they went to bed at night and what I fed them for dinner and all, didn't matter. Yeah. And so my perspective was completely refined, and I learned what really matters. So instead of my performance, what really mattered was God's grace. That became essential to me. I finally understood that what really mattered wasn't my performance, God's grace. My security wasn't as important to me as God's provision. Learning to truly trust that. My happiness seemed like a silly pursuit, and what became more important to me and what really mattered was God's purposes. And that's where my joy was found. Instead of my rights, God's glory. Instead of my longevity, God's promises. So, and again, we've talked about this before. If you're not a person of faith, none of this is going to mean anything to you. Then what really matters is all those other very temporal things. But if you're a person of faith, the gifts really are God's grace, His provision, His purposes, His glory, and His promises, because those things last regardless of the state of your circumstances. Have you noticed through your challenges, Sherry, how your perspective has been refined or changed as a result?
Yes. And the thing that I find fascinating is I don't think I have ever met someone who has this perspective about God's grace and provision and all these things who hasn't found it in the midst of a very difficult circumstance. I don't think I've ever met somebody who was like, my life is perfectly easy and I just happen to naturally gravitate towards God's grace. Every single person I talk to, they have had to come, either they've crashed and burned, or they've had a horrible illness. They've been through some kind of a trial. And my first thought was, well, can't we learn it some other way? And it seems that on this planet, the answer is no. It seems that in a fallen world, the only way that we break free from performance and all that comes along with it is to get to the end of ourselves. And, I'm thinking about when I injured my back 15 years ago and laid on the couch week in and week out and ended up actually becoming addicted to Vicodin accidentally. And then I stayed on it on purpose and realizing, that was when I really first experienced God's grace. And everything else, because I couldn't perform, I couldn't do anything else. And the world kept spinning and the sun kept rising in the morning. And I was at first very disappointed that I was so unnecessary.
I know it is a little shocking when we realize that the world does not hinge on us.
Yeah, but then I was greatly relieved. And, he's God and I'm not took on all new meaning. It was no longer lip service. It was a very, very wonderful reality.
Yeah, it is a great freedom and relief in an odd way, and the pressure comes off. I totally agree with you. There is no shortcut. C.S. Lewis, in his famous quote that pain is God's megaphone to rouse the sleeping world, right? And there really is no other way. So for those of us who pray, God, I want to know you more, or God, make my faith stronger, or those who want to have a greater character or sense of integrity or a deeper sense of purpose, all of those wishes come at the cost of difficulty. They always do. So it's a worthy prayer to pray, and those are worthy things to hope for. But it would be naive to hope for those renewed perspectives without also understanding and accepting the fact that they're going to be accomplished through struggle. It's the only way. Such a great point. So what I kept coming to my mind as I was thinking about this particular gift, this renewed perspective, is that when we pursue what we think matters, we lose it all, right? When we pursue our performance, our security, our happiness, our rights, our longevity, we end up losing those things. You know that. The person that's so desperate for significance ends up coming face to face with their insignificance. The person that is so desperate for their own happiness and keeps reaching for their happiness, it always slips from their fingers. But when we pursue what really matters, we end up gaining it all. Which that was a thought that came to mind, and all of a sudden I went, oh wait, isn't there a verse in the Bible that says this very thing? And in Matthew 16, and this is actually Jesus talking. He says, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. And we spend so much time trying to save our lives, and in the process, we end up losing them. But the moment we finally are willing to let go and to lose a life, we gain everything that we really want. I wish I could say that I have landed there and I fully get it now, but it's a daily, and I think that's probably what he said, it's like a daily take up your cross and follow him. Remember that this life that we have lived comes with a cross. I think that's what we forget. We think it goes back to some of our earlier conversations that we think comfort is ours and that ease is ours. And that was never a promise ever, never, not from the beginning. So to remember that, as Jesus said, that whoever loses his life for me will find it. That means that in order to find the life that he has for us, the best kind of life, we're going to have to experience some kind of death or loss or a reason for grief. And we're going to have to lay those things down on a daily basis and take up kind of his example, which he set the example, right?
So true.
And the hard part about this is that this will bump up against our current culture every single day. So that means we're going to have this constant feeling of maybe I'm in pain because I've done something wrong. Okay. Maybe life is hard because I didn't pray right. Maybe things are going bad because God has abandoned me. No, I mean, he said from the beginning, it's in this world too we'll have trouble, but take heart, I will overcome the world. That is the guarantee. That's the benchmark for our daily life. Our culture is going to say something else.
So true.
And so we're going to have to constantly fight that tension with, one foot in this world, one foot in the next, and understand that and understand that our perspective, a faith perspective, is going to butt up against our culture's perspective all the time. And don't be surprised by it.
The tension of dual citizenship.
Yeah. I remember hearing about this, for 30, 40 years in the church. I didn't fully get it until the last few years. And now I understand it a little bit more. So that first gift of the unexpected, or the first unexpected gift of the undone life, is this refined perspective where we know what really matters. Okay. The alternative, if we choose not to accept that gift, because there is always this alternative, you don't have to receive that gift, is entitlement or bitterness. Yeah. And I've played with both of those many, many times. Mm-hmm. How about you? Nothing like me putting on your spot.
No, and the biggest thing for me, as I think of the years I spent in bitterness especially, is the time I wasted trying to change other people, because I was just sure that if they would change, then everything would be fine, and if they would change their perspective. And I'm slowly getting to the place where I'm realizing it really doesn't have anything to do with other people, because they're part of the outside circumstance. Mm-hmm. It all does come down to what's happening inside of me and the choices that I'm making. Mm-hmm. But it's a hard reality to remember when I wake up in the morning.
Yeah, it is, because we want everybody else to make us feel better. We want that relief, or kind of like we talked about comfort. We want the deliverance of ease to come externally, either by our own activity or the offerings of other people. And it's just not going to happen. Yeah.
But it also means that when I approach them, I have such a less hidden agenda, and I'm able to, whatever it is that I'm going to give to the relationship is given freely. And I think that comes a lot closer to being love than what I was doing before, when I approached every relationship so full of need. It was very transactional. I was thinking about it on my drive to the retreat this weekend. It's very transactional. You do this for me, and then I'll do this for you, rather than transformative or transformational, where it was simply the times I'm able to do it. It's just I'm giving what I have, and then the results are literally up to God, which again is a cliche I've heard all my life. I'm starting to feel like I'm learning what it means.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it so interesting? We think we know everything when we're 20, and then all of a sudden we end up, I don't know how old you are, but I end up in my 40s. I'm like, oh gosh, I know nothing. I can see starting to get it.
I can see 50 without binoculars. Thank you very much.
Well, you look fabulous. All right. So that first gift is a refined perspective, knowing what really matters. The second gift of the undone life that I've discovered is renewed relationships. So in other words, knowing who matters. So far we have what matters, who matters. Now, the interesting thing is by renewed relationships, I'm sure there's somebody listening right now saying, my undone life has basically caused everybody to run away. I have no one. And that is part of what I've experienced as well. So by renewed relationships and by who really matters, I would just go on to say that my relationships have narrowed significantly over the last few years. I spend very little time in social kind of settings. My circle of friends is so small and so tight, but that small circle of friends has also gone far deeper than they had ever been before. And that includes my husband and my children and my extended family. But the undone life really opened my eyes to who matters, and I started to see relationships differently. I also started to see how I treated relationships and how often I approach my relationships in a very selfish perspective. It was all about making sure that you liked me and that I pleased you, and that I got something. It was really, I didn't think it was selfish, but it was all about making me feel good. And now I less care about what you think about me and more just about you. And taking some of my relational insecurity and some of my ego out of the equation because of what's happened. And some of the, just a handful of brief stories of ways that these relationships have deepened or changed is when crisis happened, I am often surprised at the people that step up and those who don't. So those people who can truly love you for you and can show up in the darkness, and those people who perhaps were just using you for their own means, not really willing to hang in with you during the ugly. And that feels like a loss, and it is a loss, but at the same time, it's also a great gain because it really refines your relationships and helps you to know the relationships that are true and those that aren't. So in that sense, even the loss of relationships with people who didn't show up, that was a gift too.
It was a gift of truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope I've become a better friend in the process. You know, that I'm not so motivated in my friendships by my own insecurity or my own selfish needs, but I just want to love people well. You know, when life is and death is on the line, you become someone who don't want to, you just have no energy for shallow, fake interactions. And so that's helped deepen and grow my relationships more. So, you know, I have my friend Yvette, who on the day of one of my surgeries actually showed up at the hospital 45 minutes before I got there at like 5 a.m. to make sure that I didn't walk into the hospital without a familiar face greeting.
Wow.
I think of my friend Robbie, who drove me to radiation appointments with a barf bucket. You know, that's a special kind of friend who will let you sit in her car with a barf bucket. You know, that's a whole different level of relationship. I think of my friend Kay, who texted me so faithfully and was always asking me how I was doing. And she gave me a journal to write in. But just her steadfast faithfulness in texting me on a regular basis for longer than a year. I mean, not just in the crisis, but long after the crisis apparently had passed. You know, those gifts really taught me, first of all, that their love for me was truly for me. I didn't have to earn it. You know, they just loved me. But it also showed me the kind of friend that I want to be in response. And so from that sense, the Undone life accomplished more in my relationships through trial and tragedy than a life of ease. You know, and trying to, again, turn that corner, and rather than seeing all the losses of friends, also seeing the ways that my friendships have grown, but also how I've become a better friend makes that worth it. I mean, just think about Undone Life Together, the Facebook group.
It's true.
You know, it's almost 700 strangers coming together on the Facebook page that have for some of them, I have no doubt they're going to be lifelong friends. If those 700 people hadn't had undone circumstances, they would have probably never joined the group.
True.
So it's actually a gift. Have you seen your relationships change through your Undone story?
I'm thinking about right after my mother passed away last November. One friend came over with a big basket full of food that we could use when we took the drive down for the memorial service. And there was everything. It was all finger foods and down to the sensitive skin wet wipes to clean my fingers after eating something that might be a little messy. I mean, they knew me that well. And what I learned by receiving that was how much, well, first of all, it was so practical. It was incredibly practical. It kept us from having to stop at all of these fast food stores and spend a ton of money on garbage. I mean, it was all healthy stuff and it was perfect. But I then felt, having received that and felt the nurture and the care and the true comfort, the strengthening comfort, not the ease comfort, but the strengthening comfort. I was like, I want to do this. I want to be able to do this for others. And I could. It wasn't like I needed to have a magical caretaking personality. I'm like, I could do this. I made a list of what was in the basket and I could do this. And so it kind of made me excited, but I realized I could not give having not received because I didn't understand how important it was. I didn't understand the experience of it. And I think so often when we're stuck in that performance mentality, it's always give to others. And it would just be horrifying to receive because that would imply weakness. There is a huge gift in needing to receive and feeling what it feels like. And so, yeah, it's had a big impact on knowing the difference I can make and then having some practical ideas on how to make that difference.
Yeah, that it's interesting because you mentioned that we, our need to please or impress, and so we give, 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 give. But even that is
Oh,
self-serving, right?
terribly.
And so this whole undone thing, learning to have that mutual vulnerability where we allow ourselves to ask for help and to receive help, also authenticates our ability to turn around and give honestly as well, without an expectation. These are all very refining. These hard struggles. It's they're such powerful teachers if we will let them be.
Mhm.
And that's what this is about. That it's a choice. It comes back to a choice. So you don't have to have these renewed relationships. Instead, you could, the alternative, rather than receiving the gift of renewed relationships and allowing them to change and yourself to change, you could easily become very guarded in relationship and isolated. In other words, you've been hurt because somebody didn't show up and somebody didn't do what you wanted them to do and everything. And so you shut down. And that it certainly hurts when somebody doesn't show up. I've had many situations over the last 2 years where somebody didn't come through like I hoped. And if I really choose to dwell on that, I would become a very guarded, isolated woman. And that certainly is my choice. I just don't want to be that. And so, again, turning that corner somehow from the pain to the possibility, from the loss to the gain, is something that you and I can do and that we have to fight for on a daily basis. And so choosing to see the renewed relationships instead of the losses, I think, is one of the most important gifts that we can receive from the undone life. And then the final gift, and you knew I was going to end up here, right? Here it comes, is a resurrected faith. And I'm sure that some people get tired of hearing me talk about this whole faith piece, but this is what's at stake. This is it. This is the biggest. This is when it comes to what's on the line. It's really not your relationships and it's not your purpose and perspective, even though those are great gifts. What's really on the line through these places of pain and loss and hardship and the undone life is your faith. That is what is at stake. And our fear is that when we go through something hard and we deal with some very real questions and doubts, we think if we follow that trail of breadcrumbs through our doubts, that we'll end up at a place where there is no God. But what I have discovered is the absolute opposite. That when I allow God to take my very hard, difficult circumstances and all of the questions and doubts that go along with it, and if I see them through, if I am willing to ask the questions and pray through them and really wrestle with them and cry and grieve and all of that, that when I follow that trail of breadcrumbs, I actually end up at a faith that is stronger than it's ever been before. And that's a scary journey because it feels like you're putting everything out there. But it's not like God sees our circumstances and all of a sudden panics and goes, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not really God. Right?
That's so funny to think of.
But we act like that, right? Like we're going, and he's like, oh no, maybe she's right. Maybe I'm not real. God knows. I mean, God's pretty secure in his identity, and nothing we do, nothing, our doubts, our questions, our lack of faith doesn't change his reality. Our struggles may cheat our experience of his reality at times, but his truth is truth. He exists regardless of whether or not we believe it. So if we are willing to walk through our undone lives and walk through the questions, we will end up at a place where our faith is stronger than ever before. One of the hardest parts about this third gift is that while I was wrestling through my own pain and losses and my own undone life, I had to face the truth that my own priorities had been upside down. And what I mean is that for my entire life, I had been hanging on to the details of my life as if it was the only thing that mattered. So the what and the who in my life were the only things that were important to me. They trumped everything else. So, for example, when I was diagnosed with cancer and I wasn't sure if I was going to live, and I still wrestle with this all the time. The fear for a mom of 6 is to go, oh my gosh, how are my children going to survive without me? What are they going to do without a mother? Will they be okay? Can they go through trauma and make it? And it was almost like God was saying to me, really? You think I could put the earth in place and set the planets spinning and put the stars in the sky, and I can't be trusted to take care of your children if you're gone?
Mm.
And all of a sudden, I had to face the fact that I had so esteemed my children and my family and my career and my ability to speak and food and my ability to taste and all the things. I had set them up at such a high priority in my life. And so when those things fell apart, my faith fell apart too, because my faith were actually in those things and not in God. And we all deal with this, right? But that has been one of the greatest gifts of this undone life, is that my family and my children, my husband, are still important to me, but I no longer panic about whether or not they would be okay if I was gone. Because if God could create me, if God could create the earth, if he can hold all of this great world in the palm of his hand, he can be trusted to raise my kids, help them to become men and women of faith, even if I am not around, and I don't have to worry about that. He's the ultimate thing that matters to me. So one phrase or sentence that I keep reminding myself again and again when it comes to this third gift is that God doesn't serve our purposes and our people. Our purposes and our people serve God. Yeah. That one kind of steps on my toes. I'm going to say that one more time. God doesn't serve our purposes and our people. Yeah. Our purposes and our people serve God. Yeah. And that means if my life is cut short because it serves God's purposes, that is absolutely okay. And that doesn't make it any less painful, and that doesn't mean we can't grieve, but we can trust that it's all right. And this has helped me to see that my faith is finally starting to get to a place where it has its rightful place. It's the supreme priority in my life. Not fully there, but it's getting there. It's more important than family and my dreams and my plans, more important than speaking, more important than being able to taste a hot fudge sundae, even though I really miss being able to taste a hot fudge sundae. There's a verse in Philippians that I thought of when talking about this. Philippians 3. This is a section of verses that Paul talked about, and I remember reading this for years and years and years and years in church and Sunday school, and it finally makes sense to me now. I understand it. But he simply said this: "But whatever was to my profit, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss. Everything a loss. Okay? Everything a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them rubbish that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness that comes from God and is by faith. I want to Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and somehow to attain the resurrection of the dead." Now, those are a bunch of spiritual words, but very short. Paul was saying he finally had gotten to a place where nothing mattered aside from Christ, and that was the most important thing to him. And the only reason he got there was through suffering, sharing in sufferings. And to get to that place where his faith and his love for God was supreme over everything else, delivered a joy that he had never had before. But it took pain to get there, which makes this resurrected faith an unexpected gift of the undone life. It just does. And as I've said in the other two gifts, there's an alternative. You certainly don't have to receive the gift of a resurrected faith. And so the alternative then is skepticism or unbelief. And you and I have that choice. We certainly can be bitter, skeptical, unbelieving, doubtful people for the rest of our lives. We certainly can. It's not a very fun way to live. I've been there. I've done that. And it doesn't change the pain at all. It actually makes it worse, but it certainly is an option. But if we're willing to turn the corner in our undone lives and see the gifts, we will end up having a faith that finally brings us the kind of joy that God has promised. Have you seen your faith change in your undone life?
What was interesting this weekend, where the retreat center I spoke at was near Yosemite, and driving on my way there, I went through a large patch of where the trees had clearly been burnt. I mean, to a crisp. All of these tall trees that were just black. It was majestically tragic, really. And I was wondering how close the fire had gotten to the retreat center. And when I got there and I asked them, they said it actually had been a controlled burn.
Oh.
And it immediately made me wonder, what controlled burns have I either had in my life or do I need in my life? Where what to me looked like absolute destruction actually was preserving what was most important. And I don't have a simple answer for that right now. But, you talk about skepticism, and the thing about skepticism is it just seems so intellectual. It just seems like the height of achievement. And really, it's the height of hubris. It's the height of pride that says, I know all and I've come to this conclusion. And driving through that huge mountainous area with all of those trees and then finding out the true story of, what that fire had been caused by, it made me realize there is so little I understand.
Yeah,
There is so little I get here, and I will at some point in the future. But to pretend that I can or should now, it is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
It is a choice.
Really is. And a hard one. I don't want to minimize those who are really struggling. I mean, it's going to, every day I have to battle this. And some days I win and sometimes I lose. In fact, just to make everybody feel better, this weekend I had a couple of days where I lost a battle and had a horrible attitude. So some days the losses are so significant that you just, you know what, you can spend a good day or two just feeling sorry for yourself. And I certainly did that. And I had to go back to these gifts again and remind myself and turn the corner. And it takes effort. It's not easy, but it's a better way to live. So again, these three unexpected gifts of the undone life are what I have personally experienced, or I should say I am experiencing, and doing everything that I can to receive horrific circumstances, or at least mine for within the horrific circumstances, the gifts that God has given me along the way. And the first is a refined perspective, where I see what matters so much better than I did before. And that's a huge gift. Second gift, renewed relationships. I now know better who matters. And I'm more intentional about investing in who matters in my life. And then the third gift is a resurrected faith, which really is why it all matters anyway. So why it matters. And that's been the greatest gift for me. My faith is now something that I have prayed. It's getting to be something that I have prayed for it to be for a long time. Something that's far more secure than it used to be. And that alone makes the last 5 years worth the struggle for me personally. But again, it all boils down to a choice. So we can, I find that an undone life usually causes two responses in us. The first response is that we resist. We scramble and hustle and we reach for the life that we want. We try to fix everything. We worry about it. We manipulate. We become experts at control. We become urgent and anxious and hypervigilant in everything, because basically we're resisting the reality of our circumstances. The result of resistance is bitterness, isolation, and unbelief. It just is. Resistance produces bitterness, isolation, and unbelief. The positive alternative, rather than resist, is to rest. To rest means to trust in the sovereignty of God and to trust in the heart of God at the same time. Not only is he sovereign, but he's also good. And it's those two things together that give us the capacity to be able to rest even when our life is like a storm that's raging. I mean, think of Jesus in the boat with the disciples during the middle of the storm. They were panicked. He was sleeping. And the difference between them and him is he understood the sovereignty and heart of God. So to rest means to accept what is as a means to experience what God will make to be. So to rest in what is, to accept what is, as a means to what God will make to be one day. And the result of that rest, instead of resistance, the result of rest is a refined perspective, renewed relationships, and a resurrected faith. Those are what I have found are the sweetest gifts of the undone life. And although I would never want to go through the pain again, and just the thought of it sometimes brings me to tears, I can honestly say I wouldn't trade what I've been given today for my life. I wouldn't trade it. The gifts that God has given me, in spite of all the losses, have far outweighed the losses. And so this kind of brings us all down to the real question, or the real theme of Undone, the book. Ultimately, it's what if the life that we call a mess, the life that we think is a mess, is actually the life that we've really been searching for all along? What if the mess is actually a means to God's glory? And what can we do? What would we do then? Would we receive it as a gift that it is? The theme of, if I could pick one verse or one passage from the Bible as a theme of Undone, it's Romans 8:35-39, which is very simply, so what then will separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? No. In all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, nor the present nor the future, nor any power, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation. I think he has it all covered, right? Nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. That's it. That's the only anchor. That is it right there. That's how we make peace with an unexpected life. So any additional thoughts that you have, Sherry, on these 5 weeks of conversations and what we do from this point forward as we try to turn the corner from living in a place of drowning in our losses to starting to reach for the gifts of them instead?
Well, first of all, I have a thank you for your gift of sharing your story with us through the book. And I wanted to just mention for those who are listening, if they've read the book and they haven't yet gone on Amazon to write a review, if they would like to give you a little gift back, that is one of the biggest gifts that readers can give to authors. And I know it's probably easy to think, well, Michelle worked with Michael Hyatt, thus she has all of the influence she needs. Really, those individual reader reviews make a huge difference, and probably in some ways very different, and maybe even a bigger difference than somebody high profile can make. So if you'd like to love on Michelle in a very practical way, then some Amazon reviews or Barnes and Noble or whatever platform. And then, can you give us a little sneak peek as to what's happening in January of next year?
Yes. So those who have been a part of this journey, the good news is that there is another book coming out in January. And just last week, I saw it. It's starting to make a slow appearance on Amazon. So it doesn't have the cover up yet, but it has the Kindle link for the Kindle book for the pre-order is up there. But it's not a memoir. It's actually a nonfiction book, but it's called I Am, a 60-day journey to knowing who you are because of who he is. The way it's still very narrative in format, and it's still it has that strange mix of raw honesty and humor, which is kind of my trademark. But I like to describe Undone as a story of making peace with an unexpected life, but I Am is more about making peace with an undone you. So how we learn to finally be okay with ourselves not being everything that we want to be. And that when we start
we have to wait till January?
Yes, sorry. But it's been how ironic that I started writing this book long before the last 2 years, and then I physically have been completely altered. So I've had to learn how to create my identity on something completely other than what I had built it on for most of my life. So it's actually a work of real-time work where I'm working through the same thing at the time I was writing it. So that comes out in January, and we're going to be doing another online study of that book at that time. So for those of you who have been a part of this, just make sure that you subscribe to my blog so that way you can get regular updates when that new study becomes live. But it will be right after the first of the year, so it'll be a great way to start off 2017 with another online study together.
All right, can't wait.
Thanks, Sherry. And to all of you who have joined us, both for the live blab, but also those who are watching the video later, just thank you so much for being a part of these deeper level conversations. This has been a very intimate group, and we've talked about some hard stuff, but just the fact that you're willing to even engage in the conversation and be present to some of those harder questions and dialogues really says a lot about your bravery, but also your desire to grow and to be everything that you can be in the middle of your undone life. And for that reason, I have great admiration for you. And to you, Sherry.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
I'm going to say having you here for this has made this whole process so much more fun. So you are a wise woman with so much insight and so
I'm
much
just
to
sitting here
offer.
learning.
I disagree. So all of us, we thank you, Sherry, for all you've contributed in these conversations. So, all right, everyone, it's been a pleasure doing these conversations with you. I hope you will stay in touch, and then I also hope we will see you back here in January. Have a great day, everyone. Undone is beautiful.